Hello, and welcome back to our third lecture video dealing with Chapter 5. And in Chapter 5, we've been talking about cost, volume, profit analysis. So we've seen so far the assumptions that we have to have when dealing with CVP analysis or when conducting CVP analysis. Remember, we assumed that selling price always remained constant. We also assume that costs are linear, and because they're linear, that allows us to divide the costs into the fixed and the variable components. And the third assumption we hold, is that multi-product companies have a constant mix of the products that they sell. And we, through the previous videos, we talked about the contribution income statement, right? We really emphasized cost behavior and the separation of fixed and variable expenses. And I'm going to say it again, and I know it's going to be redundant, but we have to know this. We have to be able to understand how costs behave, right? And we say that variable costs in total change in direct proportion to changes in levels of activity. However, on a per unit basis, our variable costs remain constant. We said the same. We also defined fixed costs, and we said fixed costs in total remain constant, again, as long as we're within that relevant range. However, on a per unit basis, fixed costs have an inverse relationship to levels of volume. We also said that fixed costs, we never, ever report fixed costs on a per unit basis. Why? Because of the way they behave. If we look at a fixed cost on a per unit basis, we know that it has an inverse relationship. So as activity goes up, the more we sell goes up, our fixed cost per unit decreases. And that gives us as managers an idea that we can change fixed costs. And we know that as long as we're within that relevant range, fixed costs are fixed. They're not going to change. We really went through the contribution formatted income statement as well, and we saw the relationships, or the CVP relationships in equation form. We talked about the unit contribution margin. We talked about the graphs, right? CVP graph, and we talked about the profit graph. We saw how to put those together. We also talked about the contribution margin ratio. We said that's also a very important starting off point when we do CVP analysis, and we saw how to calculate that. So in this video, we're going to run through some scenarios, and we're going to see how we can determine effects of net operating income that result from changes in variable cost, fixed cost, selling price, and volume. So let's look at the first example, okay? Or before we look at the first example, it's important to realize here that we're going to go through 5 examples, okay? And these 5 examples that we're going to go over should indicate to you the range of uses of CVP analysis. This CVP analysis is very useful, okay? Why is it useful? Well, it assists management in determining the level of sales that's needed to break even or to generate a certain dollar amount of product or of profit. So as we go through these next 5 examples or illustrations, we're going to see that there are alternative decisions that we can determine very quickly, okay? So let's look at this first one we have here. They ask us, what is the profit impact in RBC? What is the impact in the profit that RBC can achieve if sales increase from 500 units to 540 units, right? by increasing monthly advertising budget by $10,000. So what we're saying here is we're in a meeting and we say, okay, folks, CEO says, we need to increase our sales volume. We need to sell 40 more bikes. How can we do this? Somebody from the marketing department raises their hand and says, hey, I got a great idea. If we increase our monthly advertising budget by $10,000, meaning we advertise more, I think we can achieve this $10,000 or this 40 unit increase in sales. Okay, so what we need to do then is step back and say, okay, if we sell more, specifically if we sell 40 more units, in order to do this, we have to increase our advertising budget by $10,000. What impact will that have on our bottom line? Very easy to do, right? We can prepare a contribution formatted income statement, and we can see that the profits will actually decrease by $2,000. Okay, so by increasing sales by 40 units, that's going to increase our sales. Remember how variable costs behave. In total, they change in direct proportion to changes in levels of activity. So because our sales went up, in total, our variable expenses are also going to go up. Okay? Contribution margin is going to go up as well. Remember what the contribution margin is. Sales less variable expenses. Okay? So we now have $108,000 in contribution margin to cover fixed expenses. Well, our fixed expenses have now changed. They were $80,000, they're now $90,000. Why? Because we increased our monthly advertising budget by $10,000. So we see that we have a $18,000 net operating income. So sales increased by $20,000, but our net operating income actually decreased by $2,000. Okay? Now, in a previous video, I preached pretty much that the contribution margin is a great jumping off point, right? There is a shortcut to this calculation. We do not need to prepare an entire contribution formatted income statement. Let me show you. How can we calculate quickly and easily the change in the bottom line by increasing our sales and increasing our fixed costs? Very easy. We start with the contribution margin, okay? Because we know that once we're past the break-even point, that net or that contribution margin is going to impact our bottom line, okay? So we're going to do incremental analysis here. This is the shortcut. The shortcut is using incremental analysis, and it also reveals the decrease in that $2,000. How did we do it? Well, we looked at the increments and we said, okay, we know that our contribution margin per unit is $200. If I sell 40 more units, that means my contribution margin is going to increase by $8,000. Well, my fixed expenses also increase. This time they increase by $10,000. So we're looking at the change, the increase in contribution margin compared to the increase in those fixed costs show a decrease in net operating income by $2,000. Okay? If we look at the contribution margin income statement, we can tell why this shortcut really helps us or actually works. Look at the logic. The contribution margin is what is left after variable expenses have been deducted. Okay? Contribution margin first goes to cover fixed costs. Well, our fixed cost increased by $10,000. So we're seeing how much that increase in fixed cost eats away at our contribution margin. Another example we have, or another situation, that could arise is we could have changes in variable cost as well as changes in sales volume. Okay, this is something that definitely happens in business, right? We want to figure out a way that we can increase our sales. So we want to know, what is the profit impact if RBC can use higher quality raw materials, thus increasing variable cost per unit by $10 to generate an increase in unit sales from 500 units to 580 units. Okay, what's the logic behind this? Well, the logic is, and when I see this example, changes in variable cost and sales volume, I automatically think of Papa John's, right? Better ingredients, better pizza, Papa John's. Same kind of thing here. We're going to use higher quality raw materials in our products. By using these higher quality raw materials, that's going to change our variable cost. Because we're using higher quality, presumably, the cost of raw materials are going to increase on a per unit basis. Okay, keep that in mind. In total, they change with changes in levels of activity. On a per unit basis, they normally remain the same. But we're changing that. We're saying, you know what? I want to use better ingredients. I'm going to have to pay more for those better ingredients. So that's going to increase the variable cost per unit, in this example, by $10. And by doing this, our customers are going to see this and they're going to say, wow, instead of buying 500 bikes, instead of us selling 500 bikes, we're now going to sell 580 bikes. So that's an increase of 80 units. What do? How do we solve this? Well, unfortunately, when there's changes in variable cost and sales volume, there really is no shortcut method. In this scenario, we have to produce the contribution formatted income statement. So let's see what we do. Well, what we do is we think back to that equation that broke down the contribution formatted income statement and said, let's look at P times Q. Let's look at variable expense times Q. Okay, so we apply that. We need to first calculate, what are our new sales? Well, that's easy. 580 units times a unit selling price of $500 gives me $290,000. So sales here increased by $40,000, right? It was $250,000. Because we sell 80 more bikes, we obviously have higher sales volume. We have $290,000. Now we need to calculate the new variable expense. It was $150,000. Right? But that $150,000 is based on us selling 500 units at a variable expense per unit cost of $300. We have increased our variable cost per unit. We're saying we're using better ingredients. Our variable cost per unit are now going to be $310. So we take the new variable cost per unit, $310, times 580 units. That's our new quantity that we're selling. We see that our variable expenses now are $179,800. What is our contribution margin? Well, contribution margins is sales less variable cost, or variable expenses. The contribution margin is $110,200. So our contribution margin went up by $10,200. What does that mean to the bottom line? Well, we need to take the contribution margin and then subtract out our fixed expenses. Fixed expenses are still $80,000, right? Each of these scenarios are not combined. The first scenario said, hey, I want to increase sales, so I'm going to raise my fixed costs. Scenario 2 says, I need to increase sales. In order for me to increase sales, I think I should raise my variable cost per unit. Better ingredients, better pizza, Papa John's. I get my new contribution margin, so I'm going to subtract it from the fixed expenses, which are $80,000. I see now that I have net operating income of $30,200. Okay? So what we're saying here is, by increasing our variable cost per unit, by sales increasing or sales will increase by $40,000, that will translate into a net operating income increase of $10,200. So you're the CEO, you got to make a decision. Your production manager says, better ingredients, better pizza, Papa John's. You say, okay, what's that mean for us? You know what? Our per unit variable cost is going to increase by $10. Okay, but we're going to sell 80 more units. Okay, I think that sounds good. What's it mean to my bottom line? We do a cost volume profit analysis using the contribution formatted income statement, and we see that by doing this, we're actually increasing sales by $40,000. That translates into a net operating income increase of $10,200. Do we do it? And I hope everybody said yes, we should do it. Okay. Let's look at our next example here. This is example 3. And example 3 says we got a whole ball of wax going on here. Okay. We change the fixed costs, we change the selling price, and we change the sales volume. So we're in our meeting and we say, okay, folks, we got to increase sales. What do we do? Marketing manager stands up and says, I got a great idea. Let's cut our sales price. Let's also increase our advertising budget by $15,000 per month. I know if we do this, if we cut sales price by $20, throw some money at advertising, we're going to increase our sales. We're going to increase our sales by 150 units per month. Okay, sales are 150 or 500 units. By slashing our prices and throwing money at advertising, we can now sell 650 bikes per month. Do we do it? I don't know. We got to do CVP analysis to figure it out. So, because we have changes, we have above the line changes. And by above the line changes, I'm looking at my contribution margin as outlined. Okay? Because I have some above the line changes, guess what I need to do? Unfortunately, there's no shortcut here. I have to prepare the contribution formatted income statement, and I have to run the numbers. Okay? So let's look at it this way. First, we calculate our new sales, right? Well, the selling price per unit was $500, but we slashed it. We cut it by $20. So our new selling price is 480 units. We need to take $480 of unit sales price times the new quantity of $650, or 650 units, excuse me. That gives us new sales of $312,000, okay? We also have to calculate variable expenses. Why? Because our sales volume changed. That means our total variable expenses have now changed. In this example, we're still using the $300 variable expense per unit, okay? The proposal wasn't to change variable cost. That was the second example. This is the third example, and we're saying we're only changing selling price, fixed cost, and that's going to increase our sales volume, okay? So we have to calculate our new variable expense. Very easy to do. What's our variable expense per unit? $300. What is our new sales quantity? 650 units. So we now get variable expenses, or a total variable expense cost of $195,000. Great. Now it's time to calculate the contribution margin. I know my contribution margin is sales less variable expenses. $312,000 minus $195,000 gives me a contribution margin of $117,000. From there, I have to subtract out my fixed costs. Now, in this example, fixed cost actually increased, right? Because we added $15,000 to our fixed expenses. So they were $80,000, but under this presumed plan, guess what? They're $95,000. $80,000 plus $15,000 gives me the $95,000. So dealing with the Definition of contribution margin. I know that after I subtract out my variable expenses from sales, I get my contribution margin. I know the contribution margin first goes to cover fixed costs or fixed expenses, and then hopefully provides us with a net operating income. Now, let's run the numbers. $117,000 contribution margin minus the new fixed expenses of $95,000 gives us net operating income of $22,000. Do we do this plan? Do we listen to the marketing manager? I hope you said yes, because we do. Why? Because by increasing sales by $62,000 and increasing fixed expenses by $15,000, our net operating income goes up by $2,000. We were making $20,000 after implementing this plan. We can make $22,000 in net operating income. So our net operating income goes up. So yes, we will do this. The fourth example that we could possibly have talks about changes in variable costs, changes in fixed costs, as well as sales volume. Okay? So what's the proposal here? Well, again, we're still sitting in our boardroom. We're all managers of various departments. CEO steps up and says, folks, again, we got to increase sales. Any ideas? Again, our marketing manager says, I got an idea. What if we increase the sales commission we pay per bike instead of paying our salespeople a flat commission? Sounds good. That might work. What are we doing? Well, we're going to pay $15 sales commission per bike sold instead of paying the salesperson the flat salary that currently totals $6,000 per month. By us incentivizing our sales staff, taking away their security of $6,000 fixed salaries per month, we're now going to pay them commission. By doing this, we think that that's going to motivate the sales staff, and that's going to have an impact on our sales volume. That means that we're going to increase our unit sales from 500 bikes, 575 bikes. Well, sounds like a good idea. Let's see if it works. Keep in mind what we're doing. We're increasing the variable cost, decreasing the fixed expenses. So we have an issue here where it's above the line and below the line impact. Let's see what we do. Well, first thing we need to do is we need to calculate sales. How do I calculate my sales? Quantity times the unit selling price. What's the quantity? New quantity is 575 units. Selling price is still $500 per bike. That gives me a total sales volume, $287,500. I now need to calculate my variable expenses. My variable expenses per unit have changed, right? So I'm going to take the variable expense per unit, which is now $315. It was $300. I said, how about I add $15 of variable cost per bike on a per unit basis? So that means my new variable expense per unit is $315. I multiply that by my new quantity of $575. That gives me a new variable expense of $181,125. Great. Now I need to subtract out, or I need to calculate my contribution margin. I do that by subtracting variable expenses total by sales total. I take $287,500. I subtract my new variable expense total of $181,125. I get a new contribution margin of $106,375. Okay? I now need to determine, what's that bottom line look like? Okay? Well, I need to subtract my new total fixed expenses from my contribution margin. Remember, my fixed expenses were $80,000. Under this new plan, I am cutting that by $6,000. That means that my new total fixed expenses are $74,000. When I subtract when I subtract fixed expenses from the contribution margin, I see my net operating income is now $32,375. Okay? So what we can say here is by increasing sales by $37,500, how did I get that increase? Well, I took the new sales volume minus the old sales volume. That gave me $37,500 of an increase. My fixed expenses decrease by $6,000. That means that my net operating income now increases by $12,375. So, do I implement this change? Well, there's a lot of factors here, right? How mad's the sales staff going to be, right? Is that going to motivate them to sell more? I don't know. However, based on sheer numbers, taking all the human element out of it, just looking at the numbers, yes, we do this because the numbers say we're going to have an increase in our bottom line by $12,375. Our last example here. We could have changes in variable costs, fixed costs, and sales volume. Okay, this differs from the previous one, right? Previous one, or the fourth example, said, we're going to change fixed, change selling price, change our sales volume. Okay? I'm sorry. That was the third one. We're going to have changes in variable costs, fixed cost, and sales volume, right? We had 3 different changes. We saw how it impacted the bottom line. Now, what if we just change the selling price? We leave everything as it is, but we just change our sales volume. We change the price, okay? They tell us that we have an opportunity to sell 150 bikes to a wholesaler. No distributing, or we don't have to disturb sales to other customers or fixed expenses. So this is an example which we'll see in Chapter 8. This is really a special order for us, right? Somebody comes to us, let's say Target comes to us and says, hey, I want to buy 150 bikes from you. We say, well, okay. We already have sales of 500 that we sell to other people. Can I accept this sale from Target without impacting my current customers? Meaning, do I have to take away from my current customers to fill this sale for Target? The answer here is no, we don't. Okay. In other words, what we're saying here in production terms is we're saying that 500 bikes that we have, we are not at capacity, meaning we can produce more bikes without disturbing our current business. Okay? So what we're saying is we can sell 150 bikes to a wholesaler. In this example, it's Target. All right? We're not going to disturb sales to other customers. We're not even going to incur any more fixed expenses. What price should we quote to the wholesaler if we want to increase our monthly profits by $300 or $3,000? Okay? How do we do that? Well, very, very, very simple. We need to look at, again, the change. Okay? We need to look at some incremental analysis here. Our sales volume goes up. Okay? That means that our total sales go up. Our variable costs per bike are going to go up as well. Why? Well, we're selling more bikes. Our variable expense in total is going to go up. So we want to figure out, what do we have to sell this bike for, or this order for, these 150 bikes? How much do we need to sell them in order to make sure that our net operating income goes up by $3,000? Okay? So the first thing we need to do is figure out, okay, what's the selling price of the bike? Well, we want a $3,000 increase in our bottom line. So we're going to take that $3,000 and we're going to divide it by that special order of 150 bikes. We get $20 per bike. Okay. We then factor in our variable cost per bike, right? It's $300. So basically what we're doing is we're taking our variable costs and we're charging a price that covers our variable costs and provides enough product or enough profit to give us a net operating income increase of $3,000. Okay? We should sell the bike to this wholesaler, or we should sell these 150 bikes to the wholesaler for $320 per bike, right? Why? Well, let's look at the numbers. Fixed costs are not being impacted here, right? We know the definition of contribution margin. We know how it acts. Once we're past the break-even point, any increase in contribution margin is going to have a direct impact on that bottom line. So we calculate the new sales. In this example, 320, the new selling price, times 150 bikes gives us $48,000 in sales revenue. Okay. What's the total variable cost only of this special order? It's $45,000. How did I get that? $300 times 150 bikes. I see that the increase in net operating income is $3,000. Okay. So those are our 5 examples that we're going to see here in this chapter, and we're going to work on these. These are going to be kind of like homework problems, and we're going to work on a few examples in your study guide. Okay. But what I want to do here is kind of pause the video, or stop the video rather, before we jump into determining break-even points, which is very easy for us to do. Before we do that, kind of want to review what we need to do here, or what we kind of covered, right? So we said that, hey, we need to show the impact on our bottom line that result from changes in variable costs, fixed costs, selling price, and volume, right? So the first thing we said was, okay, what if we just have a change in fixed cost and a change in sales volume? Well, we saw how to calculate that, but we said if we only have a change in fixed cost and a change in sales volume, we have a shortcut solution for this. We can do incremental analysis. Calculate the increase in the contribution margin, subtract that from the increase in fixed costs. That tells us what happens to our bottom line. Second example we had was, what if we change our variable cost as well as, and that will change our sales volume, okay? This example was Papa John's, better ingredients, better pizza. In order to do this, unfortunately, there's no shortcut. We have to prepare a contribution formatted income statement, and we have to run the numbers. We're always taking some cost or some price times the quantity, right? We saw another example. What if we have changes in fixed cost? We change our selling price, and that's going to have an impact on our sales volume, right? That's going to increase our sales volume. That's what we want to do in all these examples. We want to increase that sales volume, okay? What impact is this going to have? How do we figure it out? Well, again, unfortunately, we have to do the contribution margin or contribution formatted income statement. We got to run the numbers. Same thing with changes in variable cost, fixed cost, and that's going to increase our sales. What do? Again, got to run the contribution formatted income statement. We saw an example here of special orders. What do we do with special orders? We're just changing the selling price. That's the only thing that's changing. Well, we calculate the change in the contribution margin. We calculate the change in the contribution margin because that's going to have an impact on the bottom line. In order for us to do that, we need to take sales less the variable cost of this special order. When we come back, we'll look at 2 methods of calculating the break-even point. So please tune back in for that one.